The prairie fire of today has a significant history, for much of our present-day grassland evolved as a result of fire. In the past, there were large areas where trees competed with grass for living space. Fire started by lightning gradually burnt off the trees, but the grasses remained, for fire does not kill grass. Unlike a tree, its body lies beneath the ground, protected by a coverlet of soil. With the advent of the spring rains, the root system, fine and well-branched, quickly absorbs the water, and the grass grows rapidly, exploiting to the full every chance for survival. As the new grass returns to the prairie, it is joined by other perennials that will continue to bloom through spring and summer. The smaller members of the grassland community emerge from their winter hibernation and feed off the nectar and pollen. But most, like the prevalent grasshopper, feed off the basic energy source, the grass itself. They feed off the grass until, with keen eyes and quick beak, a bird plucks them from their meal. Cautiously, always on the alert, it retires to its nest in the grass, taking with it the nourishment for a new brood of grassland inhabitants. The food energy stored in the grass is transmitted by the grass eaters to a variety of small carnivores. The tiny aphids, feeding off both grasses and broad-leafed plants, fall prey to predatory insects. And these basic food chains are endlessly repeated over the whole length and breadth of the grasslands. Often a food chain has additional links. The insects eat the plants. The frogs eat the insects. Then in turn, the frogs are taken by snakes, such as the garter snake. And later, the snake itself may provide food for a hawk, provide food for the badger. But sooner or later, the droppings and corpses of all these animals must return to the earth. Over the centuries, the animal remains, and the countless generations of dead grasses have built up and nourished a wonderfully rich soil, a soil that has been used to great profit. Man has turned the world's grasslands into vast food factories by carefully cultivating other grasses such as wheat, oats, and barley. Many areas of present-day grassland were originally forest, but the trees have now nearly all disappeared in favor of the crops which can flourish on the cleared land. The true grasslands have less rainfall than the forest, about 30 inches a year in the tall grass prairies. Areas that are now largely turned over to the cultivation of corn, which is another species of grass. The stem of a broken corn plant makes succulent eating for the ever-present grasshopper. As one travels further west through the medium-length grasslands, the rainfall gradually decreases, until in the great western plains it is only about 15 inches a year. On this short, dry grass graze the sheep and large herds of cattle. The bird is collecting insects that have been disturbed by the steer, a niche that is common the world over. In these western prairies, the grass never grows very long. Over the centuries, intensive grazing by bison, antelope, and so on has always kept the grass short. In response to this heavy grazing pressure, grasses have evolved that grow luxuriantly but never reach a height of more than a few inches. Although these areas are good grazing land, they must still be used carefully, for if too many cattle are put on too little grass, the cattle will overgraze. They crop the grass too short, eat up all the plant's greenery. With the photosynthetic machinery destroyed, the grass dies. The bare land, cut up by hooves, is left defenseless, and weeds spring up. However, even at this stage, the damage can be undone if the land is allowed to lie fallow for a few years. Gradually, the grass returns and eventually supplants the weeds, for grasses are the climax plants of the community. But the 400 million acres that comprise the Great have been subjected to even greater stresses than overgrazing. Back in the middle of the last century, this vast range was only used to graze large herds of cattle. But soon other settlers came and fenced the cattle from their land. The plow had followed the rancher, biting into the dry earth, turning over the native grasses to wheat. There were periodical droughts, but by and large, the land yielded a rich harvest. Then Europe erupted into the First World War. With the war came new demands for wheat. The native grasses were plowed under as never before. The war ended, but the plows and the harvesters remained. By 1925, the old grasslands had become the new wheatlands. But in the plains, a land without rivers, the annual rainfall is essential. And when the rains held off and drought again visited the land, the situation was critical. Bereft of its grass, millions of acres of plowed land lay open to the sun, and the sun baked the earth dry. The soil, without moisture, and without the grass to tie it down, lay at the mercy of the wind. The wind blew, and the loose topsoil was swept away before it. Man had turned the marginal grasslands into nothing more than a dust bowl. Unfortunately, the lesson of the 30s has not been completely learned, for even today, soil erosion is allowed to take its toll on the grasslands. But the situation has improved. Trash farming, the system of letting the stalks stand after harvesting, instead of immediately plowing them under, helps to ensure that the soil has a binder to protect it from the eroding forces of the wind. Then, too, the biologists have come to the aid of the land. At the Northern Great Plains Research Station, the native grasses are crossbred with new varieties, such as crested wheat and Russian wild rye. Normally, only 33% of the seeds of the native green needle grass germinate after an 8-month dormancy. Now, through careful seed selection and crossbreeding, 66% of the seeds germinate in the same period. Cattle are grazed on pastures that are planted with different combinations of native and foreign grasses. The object being to develop grasses that will stand more intensive grazing and provide better nutrition. Experimenting with various grasses and fertilizers naturally produces changes in the composition of the soil. These changes must be analyzed and recorded to provide the necessary data for future research. All part of a long-range program to conserve the grasslands. For the grasslands are the breadbasket of the world. Not only the prairies of Canada and the United States, but also the steppes of Russia, the grasslands of Australia, and the pampa of Argentina. This pampa is a vast treeless plain. With a thick layer of fertile soil, some of it has been put under the plow, but most is used to raise beef cattle, shorthorns and Herefords that are grazed and fattened on the alfalfa and grasses of the pampa. In Africa, over 1/3 of the whole continent is savanna, a region where the grass is interspersed with trees. Too dry to be completely forested, yet with enough rainfall to support a greater variety of vegetation than grass alone. A region where prehistoric-looking beasts are still to be found. The birds are collecting insects disturbed by the rhinoceros. A land where powerful predators are found, often in unlikely situations. The giraffe, with its specialized adaptation of a lengthy neck, browses off the trees. But the basic food supply of the key industry animals, such as the antelope and zebra, is the grass itself. However, in the dry season, the grass dies down, and the animals are forced to migrate to new sources of food. Each year, thousands of animals, weakened by starvation, die in their search for food and water. In the American West, the animals face a similar problem. But here it is winter's blanket of snow that makes life arduous. In the competitive struggle for survival, against the conditions imposed by the environment, supremacy is always afforded to the strong, the cunning, and the wary. With the snow blanketing the grass, the larger animals browse on woody plants, and the mountain lion is forced down into the plains to try to satisfy its appetite for meat. With the advent of another spring, the grass greens up and provides new sources of food. The prairie dogs emerge from hibernation. At one time, their communities were liberally spread over the western plains. But with the coming of the rancher and farmer, their teeming millions were decimated. Today, prairie dog towns are rare, and there is little doubt that they will go the way of the bison, extinct except for protected herds living on game reserves. Not too long ago, the bison roamed the prairies in countless millions, a single herd covering the plains for as far as the eye could see. At the end of the last century, however, they were slaughtered, almost completely extinguished as a species. But even though the prairie dogs and the bison have just about disappeared, the grass remains. Only grass can be exposed to fire, drought, blistering winds, and still survive. Survive to feed the cattle and a natural community that is fast disappearing. Whether as green grass or as a grain, grass is the hardy plant that feeds the world, the essential plant of an important environment, the environment that is known as the grasslands.